So, good morning, everybody, and thank you, Vince, for not only that introduction, but for supporting my work since we met almost 15 years ago, actually. I feel, with this esteemed audience of funders, I feel a little bit like Einstein's chauffeur, and Vince said something about the power of storytelling. So I don't know how many of you ever heard the story of Einstein's chauffeur, but 100 years ago this year, Einstein was traveling around the country giving his theory of relativity speech in theaters and lecture halls all in universities and various cities. And there wasn't a lot of photos in those days, or a lot of photos being published in newspapers in those days, so not a lot of people knew what actually Einstein looked like. And he was sometimes doing 3 or 4 lectures a day, and it was pretty tiring. And after about 3 months, he was actually on his way to Princeton, and he was complaining to his chauffeur that he was so tired he just wishes that this lecture series would end because he's just so exhausted from doing it over and over again. And his chauffeur said, "Herr Einstein, I've been listening to your speeches from the back of the room for the last 3 months. I actually know it backwards and forwards. Why don't you let me do it at the next one and you take a break?" So Einstein dons the chauffeur's hat, sits in the back of the Princeton lecture hall, and the chauffeur delivers the theory of relativity speech word for word, exactly intonation and cadence, exactly the way Einstein would have. And when it was all done, the esteemed head of the physics department at Princeton raises his hand and asks a question. And the chauffeur, without missing a beat, says, "You know what, Professor, that question's so easy, I'm going to let my chauffeur answer it." So welcome to Civic Hall. So I'm thrilled to have you here because you're actually part of a network, a community of interest actually around how technology can change the world for the better. Civic Hall was founded on a premise 17 months ago that technology can be used for the public good. And what we do here is not only convene groups like yourself, but if you walk behind these walls, and you're welcome to meander about or escape if you like during the day to go see, there's another 15,000 square feet of space with about 140 workstations, 8 conference rooms, a kitchen, a cafeteria, a library. And since we opened 17 months ago, we've collected over 1,000 members. This is not a co-working space, it's a collaborative workspace where people from various fields get together to work on projects daily, monthly, yearly. And they include individuals, they include startups, they include corporations, they also include many government and city agencies, including the Mayor's Office of Innovation, the Department of Education, 311, the U.S. Attorney General's Office, the District Attorney of New York, the Attorney General of New York, the Governor's Office, and even the White House has a digital team that works out of Civic Hall. And what we've been iterating on over the last almost year and a half has been building a bigger community of interest around the potential of technology for the public good, as I just mentioned. You don't have to actually be a technologist to be a member of Civic Hall, and I actually want to tell you a quick story of something that came out of Civic Hall as an example of what happens here. So when we first opened, we were very lucky to get some support from another friend of ours, Craig Newmark. Many of you know him. He's sitting here someplace, hiding in the background, planning his punchlines for when he speaks later. But he gave us a small grant to fund veterans to be able to use Civic Hall because many of them can't afford to work at a co-working space. They work at, they come back from their tours of duty and are very often struggling to find a way to make themselves plug back into society. And a young woman by the name of Kristen Rouse, who did 30 months of duty in Afghanistan on 3 tours, came to Civic Hall, and she had this nascent idea that there should be a veterans organization for local New York veterans, because the VFW doesn't really speak to recent veterans, as you can imagine, and the national organizations focused on recent veterans from the Iraq and Afghanistan war. We're focused on national issues and not local issues. But she didn't really know how to get started, but she came to Civic Hall, took a seat on a scholarship, and met somebody next to her who said, why don't you use Nation Builder as a platform for your project? And so she started doing that. And then she was at the coffee station and she ran into somebody who taught her how to use social media. She hadn't really engaged in Twitter or Facebook. And then somebody else introduced her to somebody who built a website for her and designed a logo. And she launched the New York Veterans Alliance and got 200 or so veterans to start paying her dues. And then within 6 months, they launched a campaign to convince the New York City government to create the New York City Department of Veterans Affairs, and the City Council passed the bill, and the mayor signed it into law. And now New York City has a Department of Veterans Affairs, where it only before had an agency with $100,000 of funding, and now has a department with $3 million of funding. And by the way, I just want to point out, we didn't do anything other than create a space for her to meet other people. There are lots of projects that we're taking on ourselves that we're trying to help, but the point here is that if you create a diverse, and I mean diverse, not just racially or based on gender or sexual orientation, but also based on age, professional skill, economic strata, political persuasion. If you create a truly diverse environment for people to feel safe and to be heard, not just to win or to persuade, but to be heard, then you can solve really hard, gnarly problems with a little bit more success than you would have in the past. And that's the basic premise of Civic Hall. And we also recognize that media and the role of media in society, particularly now, even through all the thunderstorms or winds or uncertainties that exist in this industry, still has an incredibly important, if not more important role than ever in making sure that there's an equitable, safe, and just world. And to that degree, I want you to feel that Civic Hall is your home in New York. You're welcome here. If you have any questions, find us. We'll be here all day. But most importantly, have a great conference. And one more thing, let's thank Vince for pulling this all together. He's a great leader. Thank you.